Here's what's next.
Greetings, this is Reverend Paul, and this is the first episode of Studio Chojin Raw. I wanted to do a weekly show that wouldn't have a lot of editing, and it would be more off the cuff. And that's exactly what this is, hence the title Raw. Because this is supposed to be unscripted and uncut. Even though it's, it's a little cut, it's just not as cut as my other videos. So please forgive me, this video might be a little rambly, but doing things this way will allow me to upload more frequently. And if there's anybody who fucking gives a shit about the fucking stupid things I'm doing, they could be kept up to date. So with that said, let's get to the topic at hand. I wanted to talk about Goblin Slayer. Now, I know I'm a little late to the party, but the, last couple of weeks, everybody's been talking about Goblin Slayer, so I figured I'd give my thoughts. Now, I've read the manga and I watched the anime. I haven't read the light novel, but so far I think the series is pretty cool. Overall, I think the manga is better than the anime in terms of the pacing and the way it establishes the characters. But the anime does have its strengths. I like the visual presentation of the anime better. I'm not a big fan of the character designs, but the way the anime uses lighting and color, especially in the goblin caves, really gives the anime a striking visual quality that I think is missing in the black and white artwork of the manga. Although I do have to say, I think the characters in the anime and the manga are a little one note. The manga does do a better job of rounding out the characters, but they still aren't incredibly deep. The characters pretty much just boil down to whatever fucking costumes they're wearing, which I guess is the point. But don't get me wrong, I do think the characters are fun, and they make sense in that sort of D&D JRPG world they exist in, but, a lot of times they just come off as really superficial. But what the series lacks in character development, it does make up for in action. The show is, after all, called Goblin Slayer, and it does deliver on goblin slaying. The deaths in the show are, pretty gruesome, and it's nice to see a modern anime embrace the exploitation elements of older animes like Wicked City or Plastic Little. It's something I think is missing from a lot of newer anime. Goblin Slayer, to me, actually feels like one of those weird OVAs that used to come out in the early 90s with all the random violence and fan service, which I think is kind of refreshing. As far as I'm concerned, blood and nudity is always a winning formula. Come to think of it, Goblin Slayer actually reminds me of Dragon Pink of all things. Which is a good thing. I like Dragon Pink. It's the whole fantasy world video game thing. It makes Goblin Slayer feel like an updated version of Dragon Pink. This is a side note, but I really wish they would make an updated version of Dragon Pink. Pink is like the fucking best cat girl ever. And Ichioko's character designs blow away anything you'll see today. You're not going to get a better designed cat girl than Pink. Although it did bother me Santa was always mean to her. I was not a fan of that. But Pink and Santa did always make up in glorious hentai action. Come to think of it, if you were to combine Goblin Slayer and Dragon Pink, I think you might, end up with the best anime ever made. Yeah, definitely. I think it would be fucking awesome. Not to beat this fucking horse to death, but one thing Dragon Pink does have over Goblin Slayer is it's not afraid to go completely over the top. This may seem like a weird thing to say given the controversy and all, but I actually don't think Goblin Slayer goes far enough. I think it plays it kind of safe. Now, a lot of people would disagree with that. They think it goes way too far already. But I think the fact that Goblin Slayer doesn't go full on, really over the top with the violence and really over the top with the fan service is what's keeping it from being the next great anime. That's what's keeping it from being up there with Berserk. Because I think one of the strong aspects of Berserk, aside from the deep characterizations, one of the strong aspects of Berserk is the fact that it's not afraid to just throw shit at the fucking wall and see what sticks. I wish Goblin Slayer would also sort of be a little bit more brave. But Goblin Slayer does have its weird quirks that I think work in its favor. I mentioned before that the characterizations just boil down to whatever fucking costumes the characters are wearing. And there are times when that works really fucking well. I love the fact that one of the signatures of Goblin Slayer is he never takes off his helmet. I mean, they ruin it in the manga because in the manga he does end up taking off his helmet. But in the anime, that whole thing works fucking great. There's that awesome part in the second episode where he's fucking sitting at the table with the big tittied farm girl and he's just fucking sitting there eating soup with his helmet on. It's so fucking ridiculous. It's like he's a goddamn action figure. He just wears the costume even when it doesn't make any goddamn sense. But anyway, that's my overall opinion of the show. If anybody's interested in me doing like a full review when the season ends, I guess if anybody fucking cares, let me know and I'll give it a shot. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the Goblin Slayer controversy. So for anyone who is living under a fucking rock or isn't aware, there were a bunch of people who were fucking up in arms about the goblin rape sequence in the first episode. And by goblin rape, I don't mean people were raping goblins. I mean goblins were raping people, specifically sexy anime girls, and that's always a problem. Honestly, the whole fucking controversy seems really silly to me. Have these people never seen an anime before? Has the world just forgotten about all the fucked up shit that happens in Japanese animation? I guess people think anime is just Pokemon and whatever the fuck Crunchyroll is playing. Now, back in the day, back before streaming services and downloading anime, back when if you wanted to watch fucking Japanese animation, you'd have to get a fucking mail order catalog, or you'd have to go to a fucking video store. Way back then, when you would get an anime, you expected it to be an ultra-violent porn cartoon. And if it wasn't, you were fucking disappointed. In fact, when I was talking to a friend of mine and I brought up the whole fucking Goblin Slayer controversy, she mentioned to me how, like, for the longest time, the joke amongst her friends was they didn't watch anime because all it was alien rape. There's this huge section of anime that's just boobs and fucking monsters. Or monsters fucking boobs. I don't know, however you want to spin it. I guess these people have never seen these. They're not aware of these. I guess they're not familiar with Ninja Scroll or Wicked City or Violence Jack. But maybe they are. Maybe they've heard of them, but they don't actually watch them because, it's not some like highbrow shit. Like they have to watch like smart, intellectual, mainstream anime. Now, something I've noticed, and I'm sure it's obvious to fucking everybody, and I might be guilty of it myself, although I try to fight it if it is the case. But one thing I've noticed is that if you're gonna talk about anime on the internet, especially on YouTube, you have to present yourself as some kind of fucking pseudo-intellectual. You can't just like trashy anime for the sake of liking it. If you're gonna like an anime, it has to be like some fucking mainstream shit, and you have to like it because it makes some kind of fucking profound statement about the fucking human condition. Every fucking anime you watch has to be some kind of intellectual endeavor. It can't just be meaningless fun. You have to like force yourself to read something into it. None of the big anime channels on YouTube are going to talk about their love of Mad Bull 34 or The Legend of Lion, and that's the kind of shit I like. Urusuke Doji is my favorite series of all time. That's why my channel is called Studio Chojin. Useless piece of trivia. Anyway, a lot of these anime channels on YouTube seem to have their fucking heads up their ass, which brings me to Mother's Basement. In the interest of full disclosure, I am not a fan of Mother's Basement. I find his taste to be banal, to say the least. But I did watch his Goblin Slayer video, and I have some thoughts. Believe it or not, I considered doing a full response to fucking Geoff's Goblin Slayer video, but after I watched it a bunch of times, I realized there wasn't a lot of meat there. I mean, his video is almost 20 minutes long, and he makes only 2 real points, and the last third of the video is just him doing a COA so he doesn't get any fucking backlash. Mother's Basement issues with Goblin Slayer basically boils down to 2 things. The first thing being, he doesn't think the rape sequence serves any story purpose. He basically says the whole point of the sequence is just to illustrate that the goblins are bad, and they could have made the same point by doing pretty much anything. They didn't have to have a rape sequence. Then he gives the example of like goblins sticking their dicks in like a basket full of puppies or fucking something, which is a strange example to give, especially when you consider his video is full of puppy footage. Makes me wonder if that fucking Geoff dude has a weird fetish. In other words, Mother's Basement's point is that the rape sequence in Goblin Slayer is arbitrary. And then he uses Psychopaths as an example of if you're going to use rape in a story, this is how you use it correctly. On this point, I think fucking Geoff is completely wrong, and here's why. The rape sequence in Goblin Slayer does have a story purpose. The rape sequence is used to show the stakes of the world, and it's used to subvert the earlier expectations of the audience. The story begins in this very traditional fantasy world, where everybody has bright costumes and the characters are all cutesy, so you're led to believe that you're in like this D&D Final Fantasy world, where there'll be deaths and there'll be violence, but you'll still be safe. Because things aren't going to get that bad. It's not going to get too gory. It's not going to get too explicit. Maybe if somebody dies, they'll like die a bloodless death off screen or something. But when the adventurers go into the cave, the show basically says, fuck that. These are the real stakes of this world. Men are brutally murdered and women are viciously violated. This is why you need to take this world seriously. This is why the Goblin Slayer takes the goblins seriously when nobody fucking else does. Because things are not all pleasant dreams and pixie dust. Also, as you find out later in the series, the way goblins reproduce is by raping women. It's a fucking plot point. It's a story point. It's important to the fucking lore of the show. So I don't know what this fucking dude is talking about when he says there's no reason for it. The next bogus point Grandma's Crawlspace makes is, the show didn't need to be so explicit. They could have had the rape sequence, but they didn't need to show it in so much detail. And that's just one of those statements that just fucking annoys me. Those are the words of a goddamn Philistine. It's one of those stupid things people just fucking repeat ad nauseum. There's no reason to be explicit because being explicit is the mark of bad work. You know, when you leave things up to the imagination, that's good filmmaking. But when you show things in detail, that's fucking bad. It's like when people say practical effects are always better. It just fucking irritates me. Now, in all fairness, what is and isn't explicit is a matter of personal opinion. Unlike Mother's Basement, I am not a sissy, so the goblin rape scene didn't bother me. I actually thought it was rather tame for anime standards. I actually think the rape in Basilisk was more disturbing, but that's another story. But anyway, if someone is inclined to be a dickless little bitch and think the goblin rape sequence is beyond the pale, that's their prerogative. They're allowed to think that, and there isn't really much I could say to change their mind. But my beef with Mother's douche nozzle is, he doesn't take issue with the scene for personal reasons. He doesn't say, I personally think this scene goes too far. That's not what he says. What he says is that the scene is explicit and it's unequivocally bad. And it's not up for discussion. We're all just supposed to fucking agree with him. And I don't agree with him at all, especially when his entire argument just rests on the fact that the scene is bad because they show tits and ass. So please, allow me to dispel this myth that something graphic is in poor taste, or something graphic is inherently bad filmmaking. Okay, this is a print by famous ukiyo-e artist Hokusai. This is a piece called The Dream of the Fisherman's Wife. And it's one image in a series of images Hokusai did for an erotic story. You could think of it as sort of an early manga. What makes this piece interesting is not only is it celebrated as an important piece of fine art, but it influenced Art Nouveau, it influenced the Impressionist, and specifically it influenced people like Picasso, Van Gogh, and Toshio Maeda. Toshio Maeda, of course, being the father of tentacle rape. So that kind of makes Hokusai the grandfather of tentacle rape. I mean, you could even say Hokusai invented tentacle rape. Thanks to Hokusai, we have tentacle rape as a genre. I think that's pretty cool. It also should be said that this image depicts a consensual sexual encounter with a woman and an octopus. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like an earlier version of the movie Possession. Now, when this image came to the West in the 19th century, Western art critics didn't know it was an image of consensual sex. They thought the woman was being raped by the octopus. Now, you're probably saying to yourself at this point, Paul, where are you going with this? This has nothing to do with anything. You're fucking reaching now. And if you're thinking that, you're wrong, because this image is extremely pertinent to the discussion, and this is why. This piece by Hokusai fits the same criteria Mother's Basement used to say the scene in Goblin Slayer was too explicit and unequivocally bad. In fact, The Dream of the Fisherman's Wife is even more explicit than the scene in Goblin Slayer, because in this piece, we could see the woman's genitals, we could see the octopus's mouth on the woman's genitals, we could see her fucking tits on full display. What would Mother's Basement have to say about this piece of artwork? According to his criteria, this piece of artwork is unequivocally bad, but this image isn't considered unequivocally bad. In fact, it's celebrated as an important piece of fine art. Even the Western art critics, who thought this scene depicted rape, never dismissed it as a piece of shit. Notable art critics like Edmond de Goncourt. Goncourt? He's fucking French. I never know how to say his name. We're gonna go with fucking Goncourt. But anyway, well-respected art critics like Edmond de Goncourt always championed Dreams of the Fisherman's Wife. They always championed Hokusai's work, and they never dismissed it. Goncourt never said, you know, Hokusai should have fucking obscured the breasts and obscured the genitals because it's too vulgar, and if he would have obscured it, that would have made it a better piece, because right now it's too explicit and it's just not good printmaking. Goncourt was always able to see the value in Hokusai's work, But Mother's Basement, on the other hand, is so fucking offended. This motherfucker is so offended, he can't see any value in the scene whatsoever. It's just bad. And like I said, if he would just come out and say he personally doesn't like it, I will back off. But don't tell me, motherfucker, that the scene is unequivocally bad because it's fucking explicit. Because explicit does not equate to fucking bad. And like I said, what is and isn't explicit is a matter of personal taste. It's something you have to decide for yourself. I am not here to tell you what to think. You have to make that choice for you. But Mother's Basement shouldn't be fucking dismissing shit as categorically bad when he doesn't seem to have any understanding of the history of art, let alone the fucking history of anime. I don't even have to dial things all the way back to Hokusai. I could bring up shit like EC Comics or Heavy Metal Magazine. Both are things that were known for mixing violence and sexuality. And just like those comics, the scene in Goblin Slayer is supposed to be salacious. It's supposed to be lurid. There's nothing wrong with invoking that imagery. That sort of imagery has been a cornerstone of art since art existed. And to dismiss it as edgy for the sake of edgy, or the fucking writings of a 14-year-old boy, just makes you look fucking ignorant and uninformed. I really should apologize. This video is getting kind of long-winded. I really didn't intend for this video to be this long. But please, indulge me a little bit more by letting me end by saying this. I spent a lot of time trying to justify the rape sequence in Goblin Slayer. And in all honesty, I really shouldn't have to justify it. Because I think Goblin Slayer is one of those things like Heavy Metal Magazine or Mr. Arashi's Amazing Freak Show. It's made for people who like that sort of thing. I'm reminded by something Quentin Tarantino said in an interview. He was talking about Gaspar Noé and his film Irreversible. If you're not familiar with Irreversible, it's a movie that has one of the most brutal and realistic rape scenes ever filmed. And when Tarantino was talking about Gaspar Noé, Tarantino said Gaspar Noé makes films for people who are interested in going on the journey he wants to take them on. If you were to say, I like Irreversible, but that rape sequence is too much, it would be better if they just cut it out completely. If you were to say that, you would be missing the point. Because Gaspar Noé is trying to take you to a place, and you're either willing to go there with him, or you're not. Like I said, my favorite series is Urusei Doji. And Urusei Doji is not made for everybody. Just because Urusei Doji is my favorite series, I don't go around randomly recommending it to people that I meet. Because Urusei Doji is made for a specific kind of person. Urusei Doji is so visceral and it is so unrelenting. Most people are turned off by it. Most people don't want to watch it. And if you like Urusei Doji, it's because you're somebody who's willing to go with the movie. You're willing to go where it wants to take you. And now, to a lesser extent, I think that's what Goblin Slayer is trying to do. And I don't know, that's what I have to say about Goblin Slayer. And I've been rambling, and hopefully this makes sense to somebody. But anyway, until we meet again.